The flickering neon sign of the Daily Grind coffee shop cast long, distorted shadows as Nia Johnson locked up for the night. 18, a freshman at Cal State East Bay, she juggled classes and this barista job to keep her dreams of a psychology degree afloat. Her dad, Captain Marcus Johnson, was away, again on some classified special forces training, leaving Nia to navigate the often unforgiving streets of Oakland in their aging but reliable sedan. Tonight, an unnerving stillness hung in the late October air, different from the usual city hum. She merged onto a quieter side street, the familiar route home. Her phone, resting in the cup holder, glowed with the last text from her dad a week ago. A short, cryptic, "Love you, kiddo. Stay focused." Easy for him to say from wherever in the world he was. Headlights flared in her rearview mirror, too bright, too close. Nia's heart gave a sudden hard thump. She glanced at her speedometer, exactly the limit. Her lane changes had been signaled. Yet, the flashing blue and red lights pulsed insistently behind her. "Just breathe, Nia," she murmured, pulling over to the curb, the engine idling. She ran through her dad's oft repeated instructions. Hands on the wheel. Stay calm. Be respectful. But a cold knot of dread was already tightening in her stomach. A figure emerged from the patrol car, silhouetted against the blinding lights. Officer Miller, young, but with a cocksure demeanor that always set Nia on edge. He was known in the neighborhood, and not for his community policing awards. Miller sauntered up to her window, tapping on the glass with his flashlight. Nia rolled it down, the cool night air, doing little to quell the sudden heat in her cheeks. "Evening, officer," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "License and registration." Miller's voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. He scanned the interior of her car, his gaze lingering a moment too long. "This vehicle matches the description of one reported stolen earlier this evening." Nia's eyes widened. "Stolen?" "Officer, this is my family's car. The registration is in my father's name. Marcus Johnson." "Uh-huh," Miller said, unconvinced. He took her license and the registration she fumbled out of the glove compartment. As he walked back to his cruiser, supposedly to run her information, Nia's fingers, shaking slightly, found the record button on her phone. A tiny red dot appeared on the screen, a small, desperate act of self-preservation. He returned a few minutes later, a smirk playing on his lips. "Everything seems to be in order with the registration, Miss Johnson, but I'm still going to need you to step out of the vehicle. We need to conduct a more thorough check, standard procedure given the initial report." "A thorough check? For what exactly?" Nia asked, her voice betraying a tremor despite her best efforts. "You just said the registration is fine. Just cooperate, Miss Johnson, and this will all go much smoother," Miller said. His hand rested casually on the butt of his holstered weapon. The implication was clear. Reluctantly, Nia unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out. Miller directed her to the rear of the car. "Open the trunk, please." As Nia fumbled with the trunk latch, her back to him, she heard the distinct sound of another car engine approaching, then slowing, its headlights briefly sweeping across them before it sped off into the night. Miller, who had been watching her, suddenly stiffened, his head snapping towards the departing vehicle. He muttered something under his breath, an almost imperceptible flicker of... Was it annoyance? Or something else? He turned back to Nia, his demeanor abruptly harsher. "All right, on second thought, let's check under those seats first." He gestured towards the driver's side. Nia watched, a growing sense of dread washing over her, as Miller leaned into her car, his flashlight beam dancing erratically. He was there for less than a minute. When he straightened up, he was holding a small, clear plastic baggie containing a white, powdery substance. He held it up, the streetlight glinting off its surface. "Well, well, well," Officer Miller said, his voice dripping with mock surprise and a chilling satisfaction. "What have we here, Miss Johnson? Looks like your family car is carrying a little something extra tonight." Nia stared, her mind reeling. That's not mine. I've never seen that before in my life." Panic clawed at her throat. "You have to believe me." Miller let out a short, derisive laugh. "Oh, I believe what I see. And what I see is probable cause." He tossed the baggie onto the hood of her car. Then, with a swiftness that belied his earlier casual demeanor, he grabbed her wrists. The cold metal of handcuffs snapped shut. "Nia Johnson, you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance." The world tilted. The flashing lights of the cruiser seemed to spin around her. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. Officer Miller, or someone, had just planted drugs in her car, and her life, as she knew it, was shattering before her eyes. Chapter 2. The long night at the station. The ride to the precinct was a blur of flashing lights and the suffocating smell of stale cigarettes in the back of Miller's cruiser. Nia's wrists ached from the too tight handcuffs. Her mind, a chaotic storm of disbelief and terror, replayed the moment Miller had found the drugs, the triumphant glint in his eyes. It was a setup, a blatant, terrifying setup, but who would believe her? At the station, the atmosphere was cold and impersonal. Nia was fingerprinted, photographed, her few belongings catalogued. The officers on duty looked at her with a mixture of indifference and a thinly veiled contempt that made her skin crawl. She was just another statistic to them, another young black woman caught on the wrong side of the law. She asked for her phone call, her one call. Her hands trembled as she dialed, the only number she could think of that might offer a sliver of hope. Her Aunt Carol, her mother's sister, who lived a few hours away. Her father was unreachable, his current training exercise a black hole of communication. "Aunt Carol?" Nia's voice cracked, tears finally threatening to spill. "It's Nia. I'm in trouble. I'm at the Oakland PD precinct on 7th Street. Bo." Her aunt's shocked and worried voice on the other end was a small comfort in the overwhelming despair. Carol promised to find a lawyer and get there as soon as she could. The interrogation room was small, windowless, and reeked of stale coffee. Officer Miller wasn't present. Instead, two new faces sat across a scarred metal table, a grizzled, older detective named Kowalski, who looked like he'd seen it all and was impressed by none of it, and a younger, sharper-looking female detective, Ramirez. They started with the basics, then quickly moved to the drugs found in her car. Kowalski played the good cop, his voice deceptively gentle, while Ramirez was all sharp edges, her questions like rapid-fire bullets. "Look, Nia," Kowalski began, leaning forward, "we're not trying to ruin your life. You're a young woman, a college student. Maybe you just fell in with the wrong crowd. Tell us who you got the drugs from, and maybe we can help you." "I didn't get them from anyone," Nia insisted, her voice rising in frustration. "They're not mine. I don't do drugs. Someone put them there." Ramirez scoffed. "Oh, come on. We hear that all the time. It's not mine. Someone planted them." "You're going to have to do better than that, Miss Johnson." Nia remembered the recording on her phone. "My phone," she said, a surge of desperate hope. "I was recording when Officer Miller pulled me over. You can listen to it. It might show something." Kowalski and Ramirez exchanged a look. After a brief consultation outside the room, they returned with Nia's phone. They played the recording. The initial stop was clear, Miller's aggressive questioning, Nia's attempts to remain calm. But then, just as Miller ordered her out of the car, before the supposed discovery of the drugs, the audio became heavily distorted with static and muffled sounds. There was a brief, unclear exchange. Miller muttering something, perhaps a quick, low word into his shoulder mic, just before he approached her car again. The critical moment of him finding the drugs wasn't captured clearly. The recording proved Miller's unprofessional conduct during the stop, but it didn't exonerate her from the drug charge. It was frustratingly inconclusive about the planting. "Doesn't sound like much to me," Ramirez said dismissively, handing the phone back. "Looks like you're still in a lot of trouble, Miss Johnson. Maybe you should reconsider Detective Kowalski's offer to cooperate." The hope that had briefly flared within Nia died, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The night stretched on, an eternity of questioning, of veiled threats and hollow promises. Exhausted and terrified, Nia refused to say anything more without a lawyer present. Chapter 3. The Lawyer and the Grim Advice. Aunt Carol arrived in the early hours of the morning, her face etched with worry. With her was Mr. Henderson, a court-appointed lawyer she'd managed to contact. Henderson was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a rumpled suit, looking like he'd been pulled from his bed. He exuded an air of weary resignation that did little to inspire Nia's confidence. After a brief hushed consultation with Nia in a small private room, Henderson met with Detectives Kowalski and Ramirez. Nia waited, her heart a leaden weight in her chest, clinging to the hope that this lawyer, any lawyer, could cut through the nightmare. When Henderson returned, his expression was grim. "Okay, Nia," he said, sighing heavily as he sat down opposite her. "I've spoken with them. I've reviewed Officer Miller's report and the preliminary evidence, the package they found." "It's not mine, Mr. Henderson," Nia said immediately, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "He planted it." "I know he did." Henderson held up a hand. "Nia, I understand you're scared, and you're saying what you believe to be true. But from a legal standpoint, the evidence against you is significant. They have the physical evidence found in your vehicle, and Officer Miller's sworn testimony. Your recording, while it shows some unprofessional behavior on his part during the stop, doesn't definitively prove he planted anything." "But he did," Nia insisted. "There was that other car. He seemed distracted. Then suddenly he finds it. And the way he was acting." "Circumstantial at best, Nia," Henderson said, his tone flat. "Difficult to prove in court. The DA will likely push hard on this. Possession with intent, given the quantity they're claiming, even though it was a small package." A cold dread settled over Nia. "So what are you saying?" Henderson leaned forward, his voice low. "I'm saying you're facing serious charges, Nia. A felony conviction could derail your entire future. College, career, everything. Sometimes, in situations like these, the best course of action, the most pragmatic one, is to consider a plea bargain." "A plea bargain?" Nia stared at him aghast. "You want me to plead guilty to something I didn't do?" "It's not about guilt or innocence in the absolute sense, Nia," Henderson said, his voice taking on a weary, almost patronizing tone. "It's about minimizing the damage. If you plead to a lesser charge, maybe simple possession, you could get probation, avoid jail time. If you fight this and lose, you could be looking at years." Nia felt a wave of betrayal wash over her. This wasn't the zealous advocate she had hoped for. Henderson seemed more interested in a quick resolution than in fighting for her innocence. His arguments felt rehearsed. Was he truly an independent counsel, or was he part of the same system that seemed determined to crush her? The advice felt less like a legal strategy and more like a gentle push towards a predetermined outcome. The thought that her own lawyer might not be entirely on her side was a new, terrifying dimension to her ordeal. "I didn't do it," Nia repeated, her voice trembling but resolute. "I won't plead guilty." Henderson sighed again, a long, drawn-out sound of exasperation. "Think about it, Nia. Very carefully. Your aunt is working on bail. We can discuss this further once you're out. But don't be rash. The system isn't always fair, but it is powerful." His words, meant perhaps to be a pragmatic warning, sounded more like a threat. Nia looked at the tired lawyer, a man who seemed to have accepted the unfairness of the system as an unchangeable fact, and a cold resolve hardened within her. She might be young, scared, and facing an uphill battle, but she would not be a willing participant in her own destruction. She would find a way to fight. Chapter 4. A desperate call and an unexpected arrival. The next few days were a blur of fear and suffocating anxiety for Nia. Aunt Carol, after a frantic scramble involving draining her savings and calling in favors, managed to post bail. Walking out of the precinct, blinking against the harsh California sun, Nia felt less like she was free and more like she was tethered by an invisible chain. The felony charge hung over her head, a dark cloud threatening to engulf her future. The news, as it often does in tight-knit communities and on campus, had spread with an ugly speed. Whispers followed her. Friends became distant, their well-meaning but awkward attempts at comfort, only underscoring her isolation. Her professors, while officially supportive pending the legal outcome, looked at her with a new, unsettling caution. The university had initiated its own review, and the threat of suspension loomed. Mr. Henderson, her court-appointed lawyer, called a few times, each conversation a gentle but persistent nudge towards considering a plea deal. "The DA is willing to offer a reduced charge, Nia. Misdemeanor possession, probation, no jail time. It's a good offer, all things considered." "All things considered," Nia had retorted, anger flaring. "All things considered, I'm innocent, Mr. Henderson." Her attempts to reach her father, Captain Marcus Johnson, remained fruitless. The classified nature of his advanced training meant he was completely off-grid, a ghost in the military machine. Nia understood the necessity, but the helplessness of not being able to reach him, her staunchest protector, was a constant ache. She remembered Frank Ramirez, an old friend of her father's, a veteran investigative journalist known for his relentless pursuit of truth, often at great personal risk. Her dad had always spoken of Frank with immense respect. With a surge of desperate resolve, Nia found his number, an old contact her dad had insisted she keep for emergencies. This, she figured, qualified. Frank Ramirez listened to Nia's halting, tearful account over the phone with the quiet intensity of a seasoned reporter smelling a rat. He didn't make any promises, but he agreed to meet, to hear her out in person. He knew Marcus Johnson, he knew the man's integrity, and he knew the streets of Oakland, knew the shadows where injustice often festered. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. Nia felt a sliver of hope, the first she'd felt in days. That evening, as Nia sat at her small kitchen table, staring blankly at a stack of overdue assignments, there was a firm, authoritative knock on her apartment door. Her heart leaped. Was it the police again? Had something else gone wrong? She cautiously opened the door, her breath catching in her throat. Standing on her doorstep, duffel bag at his feet, lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, but his gaze as sharp and steady as ever, was Captain Marcus Johnson. He was in his full Special Forces dress uniform, the beret angled just so, the array of ribbons and badges a silent testament to a life of service and sacrifice. "Dad?" Nia whispered, disbelief warring with an overwhelming wave of relief. What are you doing here?" Marcus stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the small apartment with a sense of calm authority. A good friend in high places heard his goddaughter was in some serious trouble and pulled a few urgent strings near, he said, his voice a low rumble. He pulled her into a fierce hug. "Took every bit of leverage I had to get emergency leave from this particular project. But I'm here now, and we're going to figure this out." Nia clung to him, the tears she'd been holding back for days finally breaking free. Her father was home. The cavalry had arrived. For the first time since that horrifying night, she didn't feel entirely alone in her fight. Chapter 5. The Soldier Investigates. Captain Marcus Johnson was a man of action, not idle words. The initial shock and anger at what had happened to his daughter quickly coalesced into a focused, strategic resolve. This was a different kind of battlefield than he was used to, but the principles of engagement, gathering intelligence, identifying the enemy, formulating a plan, remained the same. His first order of business was Mr. Henderson. After a brief, pointed conversation where Henderson reiterated his advice for Nia to plead out, Marcus, with the polite but unyielding steel of a commanding officer, dismissed him. "My daughter is innocent, Mr. Henderson," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And she will not be pleading guilty to anything. We'll be seeking alternative counsel." Henderson, perhaps sensing he was out of his depth or simply relieved to be rid of a case that promised to be more trouble than it was worth, didn't protest. Next, Marcus met with Frank Ramirez. The two men, veterans in their respective fields, quickly established a rapport. Frank, already suspicious of Officer Miller and the circumstances of Nia's arrest, listened intently as Marcus laid out his initial assessment. "This wasn't a random stop, Frank," Marcus said, his eyes narrowed in thought. "The way Miller found those drugs, the pressure on Nia to plead guilty, it stinks. Miller is either dirty, or he's a pawn for someone dirtier." They began their parallel investigation. Frank worked his sources within the city, digging into Miller's background, his finances, his known associates. Marcus, drawing on his Special Forces training in observation, analysis, and unconventional information gathering, started looking at the case from a different angle. He revisited the scene of the arrest with Nia, meticulously walking through every step, every detail. He examined the garbled audio from Nia's phone, listening to it repeatedly, trying to decipher any hidden clues in the background noise or Miller's muffled words. Their combined efforts soon yielded a disturbing pattern. Officer Miller had a history of questionable arrests, particularly involving young people of color in that specific neighborhood, many of whom had been pressured into plea deals for minor drug offenses. More alarmingly, Frank uncovered a significant gambling debt Miller had recently accrued, along with whispers of his association with a low-level local gang known for street-level drug distribution. The drugs found in Nia's car were consistent with the type and packaging commonly used by this gang. The theory began to form: was Miller planting evidence to meet arrest quotas, to impress superiors, or worse, was he somehow entangled with the gang, perhaps using his position to eliminate rivals or to frame innocent people for reasons unknown? The other car Nia had seen speeding away on the night of her arrest suddenly seemed more significant. Could they have been involved in the setup? Marcus felt a cold anger settle in. This wasn't just about one rogue cop. This was potentially about a deeper corruption, a betrayal of the badge that resonated with his own unwavering commitment to duty and honor. His daughter had been caught in the crossfire of something far more sinister than a simple case of police misconduct. Chapter 6. The Shadow Network. As Marcus and Frank Ramirez delved deeper, the resistance they encountered became more palpable. It wasn't overt, not yet, but a subtle undercurrent of obstruction and unease. Potential witnesses clammed up. Files that should have been accessible were suddenly misplaced or heavily redacted. They found a new lawyer for Nia, Sarah Chen, a young, tenacious attorney with a burgeoning reputation for taking on tough cases against the city. Sarah was sharp, energetic, and unlike Henderson, she believed in Nia's innocence from the outset. She immediately began filing motions, demanding discovery, and challenging the prosecution's narrative. But the shadow network protecting Miller, or perhaps something larger, began to push back. Marcus, using his skills in discreet surveillance, noticed a car that seemed to appear too often in his rearview mirror. Frank Ramirez received an anonymous, vaguely threatening email after publishing an initial, carefully worded blog post questioning the circumstances of a recent questionable arrest in Oakland. Sarah Chen found her office's computer system had been subjected to a sophisticated hacking attempt, though nothing critical seemed to have been compromised. These weren't direct threats, not yet, but they were designed to intimidate, to warn them off. The most significant blow came when Frank Ramirez, after weeks of painstaking work, finally tracked down a potential eyewitness, a night security guard who worked at a warehouse overlooking the street where Nia was arrested. The guard, initially terrified, had reluctantly agreed to speak, hinting that he'd seen something strange involving Miller's cruiser and another unidentified vehicle moments before Nia was pulled over. Frank arranged a discreet meeting, but the day before they were scheduled to talk, the security guard called Frank, his voice trembling. He was backing out. "I can't do it, man," he stammered. "They came to my house. Two guys, didn't say who they were, but I knew. They talked about my family, about how accidents happen. I can't risk it. I saw nothing, okay? I saw nothing." The line went dead. Marcus, Frank, and Sarah were hit with the stark realization Miller was not acting alone. There was a network, a coordinated effort to suppress the truth, one that wasn't afraid to use intimidation and threats. The stakes of their fight had just been raised exponentially. They weren't just up against a rogue cop. They were up against a hidden and clearly dangerous network. Chapter 7. The Media Gambit. The intimidation of Frank Ramirez's potential eyewitness was a stark turning point. The realization that Officer Miller likely had a support network willing to resort to such tactics meant that a quiet, behind-the-scenes legal battle might not be enough. The system they were trying to navigate was actively working against them, and the shadows were proving to be dangerous. "They're trying to suffocate us with silence and fear," Marcus said, his voice a low, controlled burn, during an urgent strategy session with Frank and Sarah Chen. "If we can't get a fair hearing through the official channels, we have to change the playing field." Sarah, though a firm believer in the power of the courtroom, acknowledged the grim reality. "The OPD's internal investigation is a joke. They're dragging their feet, and every piece of evidence we present is met with skepticism or outright dismissal. We need more leverage, something they can't ignore." Frank Ramirez, a veteran of many media battles, had been waiting for this moment. "It's time to take this public," he stated. "Not just my blog posts, but a full court press. We need to tell Nia's story, name names, and show the city what's really happening. The OPD might be able to ignore us in private, but they can't ignore a public outcry fueled by credible reporting." Nia, who had been listening intently, felt a surge of trepidation mixed with a desperate hope. Going public meant exposing herself completely, facing the full glare of public scrutiny, and potentially inviting even more retaliation. But what other choice did they have? "What about my trial, my reputation?" Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll try to destroy me." "They're already trying to do that, Nia," Marcus said gently but firmly. The difference is, if we control the narrative, we fight back on our terms. Frank is right. We need to bring this into the light. The decision was made. Frank Ramirez, working closely with Nia and Sarah to ensure every stated fact was meticulously corroborated, prepared a series of explosive articles for a well-respected, independent news organization with a national reach. They decided to release Nia's name and her status as a college student, emphasizing her clean record and the dubious circumstances of her arrest. They highlighted Miller's gambling debts, his rumored gang connections, and the pattern of questionable arrests. They also detailed the intimidation of the potential eyewitness. The first article dropped like a bombshell. Oakland injustice, honor student accuses, OPD, officer of drug planting, intimidation. The story, backed by Frank's reputation for thorough journalism, immediately gained traction. Local news outlets picked it up, then regional, and soon national media outlets were calling. Nia found herself at the center of a media storm. It was terrifying, overwhelming, but also strangely empowering. For the first time, she felt like her voice was truly being heard, amplified beyond the confines of a courtroom or a lawyer's office. The public outcry was swift and intense. Community leaders, civil rights groups, and even some local politicians began demanding an independent investigation into Officer Miller and the OPD's handling of Nia's case. However, the OPD, instead of retreating, doubled down. The chief of police held a press conference, flanked by union representatives, vehemently denying any wrongdoing by Officer Miller, calling Frank Ramirez's reporting sensationalist and irresponsible, and subtly implying that Nia was a troubled young woman looking for an easy way out of a legitimate drug charge. They announced that their internal investigation, while ongoing, had so far found no evidence of misconduct by Officer Miller. It was a declaration of war. The OPD wasn't just going to investigate, they were going to fight back, using the full weight of their institutional power to discredit Nia and protect their own. The media gambit had raised the stakes, but it had also drawn a very clear line in the sand. Chapter 8. The Mouse and the Maze. The OPD's defiant stance turned Nia's case into a full-blown public spectacle. The internal investigation, which Marcus and Sarah had hoped would be forced into greater transparency by the media attention, instead became even more opaque. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, or rather, a mouse navigating an intentionally complex and hostile maze. Officer Miller, emboldened by the department's public backing, maintained his innocence, his union lawyer aggressively countering every claim made by Frank Ramirez and Sarah Chen. They painted Nia as an unreliable narrator, a naive college student possibly manipulated by others, or even as someone with a hidden darker side. They dredged up insignificant details from her social media, twisting innocent posts into something sinister. Marcus, with his special forces training, recognized the tactics: discredit the source, control the information flow, and exhaust the opponent. He and Frank worked tirelessly to counter the OPD's narrative, providing other trusted journalists with verified information, highlighting inconsistencies in Miller's record and the department's statements. Sarah Chen, meanwhile, fought a relentless battle in the legal trenches. Every motion she filed was met with delays and obstruction. The prosecution, clearly coordinating with the OPD, seemed determined to drag the case out, hoping to wear Nia down financially and emotionally. The pressure on Nia was immense. She became a reluctant public figure, her face on the news, her story debated in online forums. The support from many was a lifeline, but the vicious attacks from anonymous trolls and Miller's defenders were deeply wounding. Her studies suffered, her friendships were strained. A crucial piece of evidence Sarah Chen had been fighting to obtain was a comprehensive log of Officer Miller's patrol car's GPS data and his body camera usage for the weeks leading up to Nia's arrest. She suspected a pattern of irregular activity, or conveniently, malfunctioning cameras during questionable stops. After a protracted legal battle, a judge finally ordered the OPD to release the data. When Sarah and Marcus finally received the heavily redacted files, they were initially elated. However, as they began to sift through the data, a chilling discovery was made. The GPS logs for the night of Nia's arrest, and for several other key dates where Miller was rumored to have engaged in misconduct, were either corrupted or showed him miles away from where incidents were reported. The body camera footage for those same periods was conveniently missing due to technical malfunctions or accidental erasures. It was a blatant, almost arrogant act of evidence tampering. The OPD wasn't just incompetent, they were actively complicit in covering up Miller's tracks. The maze had just become a fortress, and it seemed impenetrable. Nia's hope, which had flickered so brightly after going public, now dwindled to a fragile ember. Chapter 9. The light in the cracks. The discovery of the corrupted GPS data and missing body camera footage was a low point. It felt like irrefutable proof that the system was rigged, that Officer Miller and his protectors were untouchable. Sarah Chen was furious, Frank Ramirez was grimly unsurprised, and Marcus felt a cold rage he hadn't experienced since his most dangerous deployments. Nia, for her part, teetered on the edge of despair. "How can we fight this, Dad?" she asked, her voice hollow. "They control everything. They can just make evidence disappear." "They think they control everything, Nia," Marcus said, his jaw tight. "But even the strongest fortress has cracks. We just have to find them." They redoubled their efforts, focusing on alternative avenues, on finding human error or a moment of hubris that the cover-up couldn't erase. Frank Ramirez put his ear to the ground, leveraging every contact he had, searching for anyone disenfranchised by Miller or his associates. And then, a crack appeared from a most unexpected quarter. A young tech-savvy officer within the OPD's IT department, disgusted by the blatant data manipulation they'd been ordered to perform regarding Miller's records, anonymously leaked an unredacted, original copy of a crucial internal memo to Frank Ramirez. This memo detailed a superior officer explicitly instructing IT personnel to address data inconsistencies in Miller's GPS and bodycam logs to avoid misinterpretation. This was direct proof of a high-level cover-up. This new piece of information, this light in the cracks, was powerful enough to completely shift the narrative again. It wasn't just about Miller's actions on one night anymore. It was about a potential conspiracy, a cover-up, and a rot that went deeper than one rogue officer. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Nia and her team had a truly potent weapon. Chapter 10. The Price of Truth. The new evidence, the leaked IT memo, sent shockwaves through the already turbulent case. Frank Ramirez's news outlet, armed with irrefutable proof of a cover-up within the OPD, published a series of devastating articles. The leaked memo, in particular, naming a superior officer who ordered the data manipulation, became a smoking gun. The OPD, already reeling from public distrust, could no longer contain the scandal. The mayor's office, facing an election year and intense public pressure, announced an independent, external investigation into not only Officer Miller, but also the alleged cover-up within the department. The FBI was rumored to be taking an interest. For Officer Miller, the walls were closing in. The leaked memo directly implicated his superiors in obstructing justice to protect him, making him a liability rather than an asset to their careers. His union support, while still present, became more muted, their aggressive defense now tainted by the specter of a wider conspiracy. The internal investigation, now under new external oversight, moved with uncharacteristic speed. Faced with the undeniable evidence from the leaked IT memo and the looming threat of federal intervention, the conclusions were stark. Officer Miller was found to have not only planted evidence in Nia Johnson's car, but also to have a pattern of misconduct and falsifying reports. The superior officer named in the memo was immediately suspended pending further investigation. The fallout was swift and brutal. Miller was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including evidence tampering, perjury, and official misconduct. The superior officer who ordered the data manipulation was also indicted. The scandal rocked the OPD to its core, leading to a slew of resignations and a promise from the mayor of comprehensive departmental reform. For Nia, the news of Miller's arrest brought a complex wave of emotions. There was relief, undeniably, a profound sense of vindication. But there was no elation, no triumphant joy. The price of this truth had been too high. Months of fear, public humiliation, the derailment of her studies, and the gnawing anxiety that had become her constant companion. The charges against Nia were, of course, immediately and publicly dropped by the district attorney's office, accompanied by a formal, though somewhat perfunctory, apology. Chapter 11. Healing the Wounds, Forging the Scars. Nia Johnson was free. The legal nightmare was over, but the emotional and psychological toll remained. The experience had left indelible marks. Trust, once freely given, was now a carefully guarded commodity. The world felt a little darker, its injustices more starkly illuminated. The trial of Officer Miller and his implicated superior was a media sensation. Nia, though not required to testify in Miller's criminal trial, as the evidence of planting and cover-up was strong enough without her direct re-traumatization on the stand for that specific charge, followed the proceedings closely. Seeing Miller finally held accountable, stripped of his uniform and his power, brought a measure of closure. He was found guilty and sentenced to a significant prison term, a rare outcome for a police officer accused of such crimes. Marcus Johnson returned to his military duties, but he was a changed man too. The fierce battle to protect his daughter on home soil had been a different kind of war, one that had tested his resolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. He became more outspoken within military circles about the importance of ethical conduct and community engagement, even for those in the most secretive units. His bond with Nia, always strong, had been forged even tighter through their shared ordeal. Frank Ramirez's investigative series won several prestigious journalism awards, further highlighting the systemic issues within the OPD and inspiring other journalists to dig deeper into similar cases across the country. Sarah Chen, Nia's lawyer, saw her reputation skyrocket, becoming a sought-after advocate for victims of police misconduct. Nia slowly began to piece her life back together. She re-enrolled in college, though the path ahead felt different. The ordeal had stripped away some of her youthful naivety, but had replaced it with a steely resilience and a profound sense of purpose. The whispers on campus eventually faded, replaced by a quiet admiration for her strength. There was joy in her exoneration, in seeing justice prevail, however imperfectly. There was joy in the outpouring of support from her community and from strangers who had followed her story. But there was also a lingering sorrow, for the time lost, for the innocence shattered, for the realization of how easily a life could be destroyed by malice and a flawed system. She grieved for the Nia she had been before that night, while simultaneously embracing the stronger, more aware woman she was becoming. The scars were there, but they were now a part of her strength, not her weakness. Chapter 12. Beneath the Grey Line, a Seed of Hope. Years passed. Nia Johnson graduated from Cal State East Bay, not with a degree in psychology as she had initially planned, but with a degree in political science and a minor in legal studies. The fire lit within her by her own ordeal had guided her towards a new path. She went on to law school, driven by an unwavering commitment to fight for those who, like her, had found themselves caught beneath the grey line where justice and injustice blurred. She excelled, her personal experience lending a unique depth and passion to her studies. The Oakland Police Department, in the wake of the Miller scandal and the subsequent federal oversight, underwent a series of painful but necessary reforms. New leadership was brought in. Body camera policies were overhauled. Training programs focusing on de-escalation, implicit bias, and community accountability were implemented. The changes were slow, often met with internal resistance, but there was a palpable shift, a sense that the old ways were no longer tenable. Marcus Johnson eventually retired from the Special Forces, a decorated hero. He dedicated his time to working with veterans support groups and, occasionally, speaking to law enforcement academies about the importance of honor, integrity, and community trust, lessons learned not just on foreign battlefields, but in the fight for his own daughter's freedom. Nia Johnson, now a young, sharply dressed prosecutor working for the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, specifically in a newly formed Civil Rights Division, stood in a courtroom. She was prosecuting a case involving an officer accused of excessive force against an unarmed teenager. The defense attorney was aggressive, the evidence complex. As she delivered her closing argument, her voice was steady, her gaze direct. She spoke of the public's trust, the responsibility that came with a badge, and the devastating consequences when that trust was broken. She didn't mention her own story. She didn't need to. It was woven into the fabric of her conviction, into the very core of her being. During a recess, Nia received a call from Frank Ramirez. "Nia," he said, his voice urgent, "I've got a new tip. Another Miller. Different precinct, same. Mo, looks like the fight's never really over." Nia listened, a familiar weariness washing over her for a moment, quickly followed by a renewed sense of purpose. She looked at her reflection in the polished wood of the courtroom door. Her past was a part of her, but it didn't define her. It fueled her. "Send me what you've got, Frank," she said, her voice calm, resolute. "Let's get to work." The gavel would fall in her current case, and then another would begin. The line between justice and injustice would always be a battleground. But Nia Johnson was no longer a victim, cowering in the shadows. She was a guardian standing in the light, armed with the truth, her own experiences a constant reminder of what was at stake, and her spirit an undying echo of hope. The work was far from done, but she was ready.